He was summoned by mistake to become a simple healer, but he's stronger than the legendary heroes. Usato is an ugly, disgusting, pathetic high school with nothing going on in his life. Bad grades, no friends, no girls, just like you. In short, he's the nice guy who helps some birds on a usual day. Yet, he wishes he was in a fantasy world to cure his boredom of being an ordinary loser. But one day, someone steals his umbrella, and he decides to wait for the rain to pass because princesses cannot get wet. However, despite the waiting, the rain never stops. Suddenly, he hears the student council president Suzune asking him what's going on. She asks if he doesn't have an umbrella, and despite being nervous around her, he confirms. She tells him the school is about to close, and Usato takes it as a clue to get his ugly face out of her sight. He decides to leave, but the beautiful and perfect president stops him by telling him she won't let him get wet. Suddenly, Vice President Kazuki appears, the typical perfect dude, and claims that he will let Usato have his spare. Suzune asks if they're friends, but Kazuki replies they're classmates. Usato is confused because they never spoke before, but realizes that he's the typical disgusting nice guy. Usato thanks him for the umbrella, and Kazuki asks what they should call him. Suzune steps in the middle of them, telling him she will also call him Usato. Our pathetic loser blushes, thinking she's trying to flirt with him. They ask if he wants to walk home with them, to which he also cannot believe he gets the chance to walk with the cool kids. He accepts the deal, and as they walk, Usato explains that Kazuki only talks to girls and stuff. Kazuki answers that he simply answers the girls' questions. Suzune teases Kazuki's popularity, and Usato tries to give his best shot. He mentions how Suzune is pretty much a goddess. Yes, he barely leaves his mom's basement. Suzune calls herself an average student, but Kazuki also decides to join the Dumb and Dumber party, mentioning how perfect she is. She's the best student, great at sports, kind, and also pretty. Usato then decides to give his shot and asks if they're a couple. The two get confused but explain those are just rumors because they spend tons of time together in the student council. She still feels impressed that Usato is the only person who had a pair to ask it. Suzune asks if Usato has some plans for the future, but he plans to stay in his mom's basement. Kazuki mentions that she asks the same question to everyone. Suzune replies that she's just curious because she has none. Usato asks why she doesn't, and she reveals that she doesn't have any because she accomplishes all her goals pretty fast. She reveals that for that reason, she feels isolated and doesn't think she belongs to this place. But Usato thinks that they're quite similar as they feel the same thing about their lives. Suddenly, Suzune and Kazuki heard a bell and stopped. Usato is confused and asks what's going on. Kazuki asks if he heard the bell, but Usato doesn't. They hear the bell again, this time even louder, but Usato still cannot hear it. He gets closer when suddenly, a magic circle appears under their feet. Kazuki starts to freak out, but Usato spits some facts. They're being summoned to another world. Kazuki thinks that this loser is crazy, but Suzume's reaction shocks them. She's smiling while asking if he means that they will reach a place full of magic, monsters, and heroes. In those last moments, Usato is impressed about how Suzume has a thing for that stuff. Seconds later, they open their eyes to find themselves inside a strange room. Upon looking around, they see a random geezer sitting on a throne. Usato is confused about this place and its people, but Kazuki doesn't know. He then looks for Suzume, just to find her hyped and smiling because this is another world. He thinks she just went bonkers. The old geezer sitting on the throne is happy they managed to wake up and stuff, but Kazuki arrogantly asks what is this all about. The geezer introduces himself as Lloyd, the king of Linger. Kazuki is confused, but Suzume is happy about it. The geezer explains they have been summoned as heroes, which makes Suzume even happier. The king explains the same garbage as always. There's a demon lord who resurrected and is currently raising its armies. The kingdom has been attacked for the past 2 years, but they barely survived. Their last hope was to the forbidden spell to summon heroes from another world to fight against the guy who was cheated on by his wife. Suzume is always acting ecstatic every time she hears something new, however, gets mad and tells him to stop kidding. He literally calls the king selfish for dragging them here and doing the dirty work. He asks them to return them to their world, but the king explains that's not possible because the summoning only works in one direction. Kazuki continues his Karen mode, mentioning they all have families and stuff. The king replies they are desperate, but Kazuki couldn't care less. He gets angrier, but the soldiers point their arms at him. Usato tries to calm him down, and Kazuki finally follows some good advice. The king walks forward and kneels in front of Kazuki, promising to find a way to send them home after the job is done. Everyone else also kneels and Suzyum asks the king why he is calling them heroes. The king tells his mage Welsi to explain. She reveals that the summoning spell seeks people who have the potential to become heroes. In short, everyone with that potential will hear the sound of a bell ringing. Suzyum and Kazuki understand that condition but then remember that Yuzato is different. They ask if he truly didn't hear anything and he confirms, which means he got here by accident. His parents didn't want him, nor this world, just like you. They then go into Welsi's room to check their magical aptitude. All they need to do is touch the crystal ball and they will find which magic they can use. Suzyum becomes all hyped out while Welsi starts preparing for the test. Meanwhile, Kazuki asks Yuzato if he's alright with all of this. Yuzato says it's fine as Welsi already told him he could probably still use magic despite not being able to be a hero. However, Kazuki is talking about being summoned to this world against his will. In his case, they didn't even want him. Yuzato dismisses it because it's all he wanted. Kazuki thinks that Yuzato is pretty chill about it, but he mentions that Suzyum is the odd one. They look at her being a typical weirdo and think that's true, to the point that Kazuki thinks this is her being an optimist. Yuzato knows this is not the case, but they suddenly see the crystal ball glowing. Welsi made all preparations and told Suzyum to start her test. She happily touches the crystal ball and a yellow glow appears. Welsi explains that this means that she can use thunder magic, but she also has a huge amount of mana. Kazuki thinks that Suzyum looks happy, but deep down Yuzato knows this magic fits her fantasy dream. Kazuki then touches the crystal ball, and it turns white. Welsi explains he has a light attribute. Suzyum becomes all hyped out, telling him to use a laser beam and stuff, but Yuzato tells her to stop being a nerd. She gets annoyed that Yuzato cut her off, but she then reveals that she likes that in a man. Yuzato feels shattered. He thought of her as the perfect girl, turns out she's a freak. Welsi explains that light magic is the strongest attribute because it counters the demon lord. Yuzato decides to try it too, but there's a flash of green. Suzyum and Kazuki think that's a beautiful and calming color and ask Welsi what is that attribute. Yet, Welsi is freaking out. She grabs Yuzato's hand and runs back into the throne room. The king is confused but asks if they already checked their aptitudes. Welsi confirms, mentioning Kazuki and Suzyum's huge potential. But there is a problem, Yuzato. The king laughs while asking if he has the power to control darkness or something. But he's shocked when he learns the crystal turned green. Welsi explains his attribute is extremely rare, but the king tells her to shut up and not say it. Yuzato is confused thinking his attribute is bad. The king starts to plot, mentioning they must take Yuzato as far away from the castle as possible. However, he doesn't think there's any safe place. Maybe they should hide him in town for a while. Meanwhile, a woman is walking in the hallway. The king tells his guards to make preparations, but Yuzato says that he doesn't understand what's going on. He asks if he's dangerous and if there is someone else with his attribute. The king freaks out as he replies yes, but that person is bad news. Suddenly, the woman walks into the throne room, scaring everyone. This is the person the king was talking about. She asks the king how the summoning ritual went and if the heroes are already there. The king tries to play it cool, asking if it isn't her off day. Yet, she refuses to take any off days. She then notices Yuzato and asks if he's the hero. Yuzato gets scared and crawls back, and the king explains he was summoned by mistake along with the heroes. He calls Yuzato an average pleb, but she clearly notices the king is sweating. She asks for his name and introduces herself as Rose, the captain of the rescue team. Yet, Yuzato clearly knows that she looks like someone who should be killing, not rescuing someone. Welsi intervenes, mentioning the heroes are waiting by the crystal ball, and tells her she will take Rose there. Rose accepts that and prepares to leave. The king feels relieved everything went well and tells Yuzato to rest while they figure out what to do in his situation. Yuzato accepts, but he wants to know what his magic attribute means. He stupidly asks what a green light means. Upon hearing those words, Rose stops. Everyone inside the room starts to freak out. Rose turns back and asks if he just said green. Yuzato confirms, and she tells the king that she will be taking Yuzato with her. The king freaks out, telling Welsi to get Yuzato out of there. Welsi casts a spell, creating a bubble around Yuzato, forcing him out of the castle. Yet, Rose smiles and dashes outside with her insane speed. Welsi's bubble gets out of the window and tries to take him as far as possible outside the kingdom. However, Rose's speed and power enable her to catch up with him. She then punches the bubble, breaking it. Yuzato thinks he's done for. After all, there's no parachutes in this world. Yet, Rose manages to reach and catch him. She uses a statue to break down her fall and calls out the king. She tells him that she will turn Yuzato into a proper healer and walks away. The king shouts at her to return, mentioning that he knows that she wants to recruit more healers. However, Yusato was summoned by accident. Rose ignores the king and continues walking. After returning inside, Welsi explains to Suzume and Kazuki that Yusato was taken. They're worried he might be in danger, but Welsi explains that's not the case. Kazuki wants an explanation. She reveals he was taken away from the castle to the rescue squad. She reveals that Yusato's attribute is healing magic. Healers are rare in this world and Rose is one of them. Meanwhile, Rose is taking Yusato under her arm to her base when a fox girl pays attention to what's happening. Welsi continues to explain that Rose will basically teach Yusato everything she knows. Suzume thinks that's pretty normal, but Welsi reveals that Rose's training methods are unorthodox, which means Yusato will be living in hell. After reaching the base, Rose explains Yusato has the potential to become a healer. He's pretty confused, and she reveals he will be living here from now on and that's the reason she brought him. She then calls the rest of the members, but when Yusato looks at them, he realizes they're literally a band of bandits. Rose tells them to take care of Yusato, but they all look at him like serial killers. He tries to back away while scared in fear, but the guys introduce themselves, which looks more like a robbery. Yet, Rose kicks Tong away because Yusato is crying in fear. They complain, mentioning they were introducing themselves in a nice way. Rose then explains they all belong to the squad but are not healers. In fact, her rescue squad has only 2 more healers, but they're stationed somewhere else, which is why she will personally teach him about healing magic. Yusato freaks out. His instincts are telling him to scream and run, but he can't move. He tries to ask for another instructor, but she ignores him while saying that training starts tomorrow. She orders Tong to show Yusato the place and leaves. The bandit gang smiles at him and tells him how miserable his life will become because Rose will be teaching him. In short, he will be living in hell. During the night, Yusato is initially worried about everything, but he then realizes there is no point in worrying and falls asleep. The next day, Yusato meets Kazuki and Suzume, who are relieved that he's alright. He apologizes for worrying them, but remembers that Rose exists and that she will train him starting today. The two are surprised about this supposed hellish training and ask if he's prepared. Yusato confirms, mentioning he has nothing else to do because he wants to be able to help them someday. Rose suddenly steps outside and asks if the heroes are gone. Yusato gets scared to return to reality and doesn't reply. Rose then explains he's not in prison and that he can meet his friends when he wants as long as he isn't training. Yusato thanks her, and she gives him a diary to write down his training program, experiences, or whatever he wants. His first day of training was the opposite of hell. In short, his first task was to concentrate and relax. He feels something on his chest, and Rose explains that's magic, and she will teach him how to project it out of his body. After finishing that training, Rose orders him to read a book. Using the images, Rose explains their current location and where the demons live. Since they're close to each other, Linger is the demon's first target. She tells him to read the book as he will learn about the world nations, races, and demons. Yusato starts reading it, thinking this training is easy. However, the next couple of days were different as Rose forced him to run until his body couldn't do it anymore. Yet, every time his legs gave up, Rose slapped him with healing magic and ordered him to run again. Yusato gets up and runs for his life, but she tells him that even if he dies, she will heal him back to life just to make him run. Yusato thinks she's out of her mind, but he decides to vent about it in his diary. On the 6th day, Rose thought he was slow and insulted him. He ends up hugging the floor, and again decides to vent on his diary. However, while trying to get up, he notices that his hand is glowing. He's confused that it looks like healing magic, but doesn't understand why it's activating. Days 8 and 9 were pretty much the same: run into exhaustion, get slapped or kicked, and repeat it for the whole day. However, without noticing, Yusato was healing himself every time he got injured. He later realizes that he's using healing magic as second nature, and starts running again without being ordered to. Yet things changed on the 10th day. Since he now knows how to use magic, he can now run without getting tired. However, he still had doubts if he could help Kazuki or Suzume as he could only run. But Rose added 1,000 push-ups to his training program. Yusato knows he cannot do it by himself, that's why he continues to use healing magic to make sure his body can handle it. Rose then reveals she's forcing him to train his body because he needs to run from the enemy on the battlefield and save his fallen comrades. Therefore, the faster he runs, the faster he will be able to save them. Yusato is surprised by those words, but she orders him to continue doing push-ups. He continues the training, but is surprised that Rose didn't yell at him. He thinks he should be happy about it, but in reality, he's scared. He quickly got used to this training, and Rose started to add some weights while he ran. On the 21st day, Kazuki and Suzume visit him alongside the princess and a knight. Upon arriving there, they are shocked to see Usato doing push-ups with Rose sitting on a huge rock on top of him. She complains that he's too slow and motivates him to not quit. But our boy grows a pair and says that this is too easy because she's light. Rose then places another rock on top of the other. Despite the initial regret, Usato continues, using his magic to heal himself. Rose even admires his determination, saying that he's becoming her type of guy. The other two cannot believe Usato is going through this, but Suzume quickly starts drooling after checking his muscles. However, the knight gets angry and grabs Rose's collar, asking why she is trying to destroy Usato. Rose grabs his hand as she tells him that she will use her methods to make Usato become her right-hand man. She claims that Usato is a catch because he hates losing, but what she loves the most is that he doesn't give up. Rose then orders him to take a break and have lunch. While resting under a tree, Usato finds out that the guy is the kingdom's strongest knight, Siglis. He is the one who's teaching Kazuki and Suzume how to use the sword. Usato finds it impressive. Kazuki then asks if Usato's training has always been as bad as just now. Usato simply replies that today was pretty easy. Suzume decides to check out our boy's muscles despite him being shy about it. She's all into his huge abs, even the princess cannot contain her curiosity. Kazuki then continues, explaining that he felt like Usato was having a hard time. Usato confirms that he wanted to run in the beginning, but he's fine now because he enjoys training and life here. Suzume is impressed that he already found a place to belong. He shows his healing magic and explains he also wants to help them. Suzume uses this chance to flirt, telling him to save her when she needs it. Yet, Usato simply tells her it's too late to act like a normal girl. She gets mad, but even the princess agrees with him. Yet, the next day, Rose gives him a bag and tells him they will head outside. The bandit-looking guys get worried as they realize it's finally time. Usato gets confused, but after some hours, they reach a cliff. Rose reveals that ahead of him, there's a forest called the Darkness of Linger. She then gives him his orders. He can only come home after killing a grand grizzly. Usato tries to refuse it because that's one of the strongest monsters. Plus, he doesn't know how to fight because she only taught him how to run. Yet, Rose gets annoyed and throws him into the forest. While in mid-air, Usato starts to freak because he's on a freefall to death. He then turns around and casts healing magic to survive the impact. Yet, he refuses to die and turns around again, using his healing magic to land safely. He's relieved that he managed to survive and uses his healing magic again to recover from minor injuries. However, he knows that since he's now inside the forest, he must follow Rose's instructions if he wants to go back home. Therefore, he makes his decision to kill a grand grizzly. He claims that's just a 7-foot-tall monster, which is nothing to someone who survived hell. Suddenly, that same bear appears behind him. He starts running away from this chasing bear, who's a lot bigger than he thought. But since his training was basically just running, he knows he can outrun it. He thinks there's no way a bear can catch up with him, but the bear is just behind. He remembers all his training and how he endured that suffering. He thinks the bear is nowhere as scary as Rose and decides to fight it. However, 2 more bear clubs appear behind the big one. Time to hit the hells and outrun all those bears while complaining. He suddenly hears a waterfall nearby and decides to jump inside it. Luckily, he manages to escape those bears and survives. He swims to shore and dries up his clothes. He checks his backpack and sees he only has some rations, a canteen, and a knife. He complains about not having anything to start a fire and calls her a demon. He bites the harder than a brick bread and thinks his mission is impossible. But his situation becomes worse when he hears some wolves. He decides to figure out what he will be doing the next day. He marks day on a tree and falls asleep. He's now prepared for the mission and decides to explore the forest. He keeps marking trees to avoid getting lost and thinks that he should know his enemy first. He's trying to find the grand grizzly's den and walks through the whole forest. He finally gets some clues when he sees some claw marks on a tree. He thinks that's the grand grizzly's claws and it could be nearby. He then suddenly hears some noise from the bushes and pulls out his knife. Turns out it's just a rabbit. He gets confused, thinking it could be a monster, but the rabbit moves forward and collapses. He notices an injury and asks if the rabbit is injured. Usato is surprised because the rabbit shakes his head up and down as if he understood him. He then decides to use his healing magic to cure the rabbit and pats him. He hides behind a tree after telling the rabbit to be careful. However, it seems like the rabbit is following him. He tells the rabbit to go away because it will be dangerous, but the rabbit refuses to. Usato keeps walking away, but the rabbit keeps chasing him. Since the rabbit refuses to stop, Usato asks if he knows where the Grand Grizzly is. The rabbit starts walking to the side and looks back at him. Usato understands this must mean to follow the rabbit. The rabbit then leads him through the forest, taking Usato to the Grand Grizzly's den. Usato decides to observe the bear's behavior without being spotted. According to the book he read, Grand Grizzlies live in groups, which seems to be the case. The rabbit then acts all cute, asking for a pat. Another day has passed, and Usato is unsure if he should fill his canteen with untreated water. However, he doesn't have time to think about it. Suddenly, the rabbit appears and jumps onto his shoulder, surprising Usato. He thought the rabbit went away, but he returned. He thinks this is a strange rabbit and tells him they will observe the bears again. There's no change in behavior, the big one is sleeping again, but the blue ones are starting to look cute. Usato also thinks the rabbit is cute, and this mission somehow is letting him have some fun. However, on the fourth day, Usato feels some stomach aches. He regrets drinking the river water, especially because healing magic doesn't make it better. He compares it to being poisoned and thinks there must be a way to cure it. The rabbit appears once again asking for some pats, and Usato forgets for a moment about his pain. He only recovers on the fifth day, and the rabbit takes him to a small pond. Usato understands this water is safer to drink and notices how it looks cleaner than the river. He gives it a try and says that it even tastes better. The rabbit, however, seems to be scared. Usato wants to know what's wrong, but the rabbit simply starts climbing a tree. Usato is confused and also climbs the tree. He notices the rabbit looking at an empty place. He thinks the rabbit senses a monster approaching, but that's strange because the rabbit wasn't afraid when he saw the Grand Grizzly. He notices the rabbit shaking in fear, but he then hears some noise. He looks carefully and sees a huge white snake. The rabbit starts to shiver, and Usato wonders what kind of monster that snake is. He never saw that monster in his book. The snake is slithering away, and Usato can feel that this is a monster way stronger than a Grand Grizzly. He feels an intense bloodlust coming from it and promises to never get near it. For the next few days, Usato was still feeling uneasy, but he kept watching the bears. He thinks their behavior has never changed, and for some reason, he feels calm when looking at them. However, he knows that if he doesn't kill the Grand Grizzly, he cannot go home. And with that thought, he decides that tomorrow is the day he must do it. Yet, the next day is filled with rain, and the rabbit trying to convince Usato to not go. Usato says that he must do it, but the rabbit keeps trying to pull his leg. Since the weather is an average day in England, he decides to wait until the rain stops. After some hours, the rain finally stops, and Usato grows a pear, promising to make minced meat out of the Grand Grizzly. The rabbit jumps onto his shoulder, but there's no way Usato will be stopped from heading back home. The rabbit feels sad, but still lets him go. After reaching the bear den, Usato prepares his knife while the rabbit jumps out of his shoulder. Usato then walks into the nest, but he strangely sees 2 of the 3 bears are dead. He wonders what happened and thinks that Rose will kill him because something killed the Grand Grizzly before him. He looks closely and notices some bite marks. He realizes the one who did it was that huge snake. However, the snake didn't eat them, which means she did it for fun. Usato then hears some noise coming from some rocks and gets startled. Upon looking closely, he sees the small bear coming out. The little bear tries to wake up its mother, to no avail. Upon seeing that, Usato thinks about how he hates about losing. He never wanted to admit defeat to Rose, but his prey was now gone, and his resolve resulted in nothing. The little bear starts crying after realizing he won't play with his mother again, and Usato thinks that he hates to see this stuff the most. He makes up his mind and walks away while promising the small bear that he will take revenge for him. The small bear watches him go, sniffs the floor, and goes in another direction. Meanwhile, Kazuki and Suzume come to visit Usato when they're told that he's been training in the forest for the past 10 days. Kazuki thinks that's a bit too long, but the big guy reveals they cannot go against her orders. While walking away, Suzume tells Kazuki that he seems fired up when it comes to Usato. He asks if she isn't worried, but she replies that despite her worries, they should trust Usato and Rose. Back in the forest, Usato is making a spear out of a stick and gets his needed calories. After some stretches, he makes up his mind and asks the rabbit to take him to the snake. The rabbit is worried, but he tells it to just take him to the snake and leave. The rabbit starts walking and Yusato follows. After a long walk, they manage to find the snake, but Yusato sees the little bear trying to fight the snake. Upon looking the snake in the eyes, Yusato thinks he's scared, but not as scary as Rose. He charges forward, surprising the little bear. He tries to throw his level 30 spear, but the snake tries to eat his head. He manages to avoid it and stabs its eye. The snake uses its tail to push him against a tree, but he uses his heel to recover and get up. He then pulls out his knife and the snake attacks him. Yusato knows he must use the blind spot, which is the right eye, to attack the snake. He dodges the attack and uses his speed to run toward the snake while it recovers. However, the snake uses its tail to attack him. He dodges it, but the smoke cloud allows the snake to bite his arm. He shouts in pain, realizing the snake was biting him. He uses his heel to recover from the pain and uses the bitten arm to stab the knife from inside its mouth. The snake gives up and sets him free. However, Yusato starts to feel its poison. He thinks it's not fair, but he knows a way to heal himself from his experience with the river water. If his injury is internal, he must use his heel to recover internally. With that, he recovers and charges again. The snake uses the tail to attack him, but the small bear decides to help and manages to block it. Yusato then jumps over the bear and lands on top of the snake's head. He then punches the snake with his healing magic to knock it down and follows up by stabbing its eye again with the spear. The snake tries to resist, but in the end, it gives up and stops moving. Yusato lays on the ground and takes some deep breaths, happy that he managed to do it. However, the little bear is staring at him closely. Yusato realizes that he will now become the little one's lunch. However, the bear treats him gently and Yusato pats it, mentioning that he managed to get revenge for him. He tells the little one that he cannot heal him right now because he uses most of his magic to cure the poison. Yet suddenly, the snake raises again and looks at them. Yusato cannot move, and the little one tries to carry him away. However, our boy is heavy. He orders the bear to run away, but the snake lunges to attack them. Yusato realizes this is the end and starts cursing Rose. He blames everything on her and calls her an ogre. Suddenly, Rose appears from the air and kicks the snake down. She starts cursing the snake, saying that it should have died when Yusato was fighting. Both Yusato and the little one are shocked. Yusato asks what she is doing here, and she reveals the rabbit called her. Yusato is confused, but she explains that the rabbit is her pet Kukuru, who she told to watch over Yusato. Yusato doesn't believe it because the rabbit was injured when they met each other. Rose then reveals it was all a scam to gain his trust. Rose then explains she was always nearby just in case, but she didn't expect this snake to appear in the forest. Yusato asks what this is, and she explains it's a monster modified by the Demon Lord's army. In fact, Siglis wasn't able to defeat the snake in the last Demon Lord's invasion. She doesn't know how the snake managed to beat the Grand Grizzly, especially because the kingdom's elite force can't do it. Yusato thinks she's a monster because she told him to do that. Rose reveals she never expected him to win that fight. She just wanted him to get experience. However, things got interesting, and she wanted to see what he would do. He complains that he almost died, and the little bear also comes to defend Yusato. Rose notices the little one likes Yusato, making him think that the bear lost his parents and is lonely. He pats the bear, and the two act friendly. Rose compliments Yusato and tells the bear he will be coming with them, but he has to carry Yusato. The bear takes Yusato on his back, and Rose grabs the two with one hand and carries them back. She tells Yusato that he passed this exam, and now he has the right. He gets confused, but she reveals that despite lacking training, he has the right to stand next to her on the battlefield. She says that he has everything, a body that can withstand pain, physical prowess, and more importantly, an indomitable spirit. That's something that the other healers in her squad lack. She tells him to be proud, and they might still make it back in time. Yusato is confused, but she reveals the Demon Lord's army is preparing to attack. Watch this next video. See you on the next one.